Hello, I am Bhagat Oinam. I am Professor of Philosophy at Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi. Uh, the topic of my lecture today is intuitive and spiritual experiences as philosophical methods. Uh, this topic, I presume, is not very popular and even at times can generate controversy and resistance from those who do mainstream philosophy. Uh, I have deliberately chosen intuition and within that and spirituality. And within that I would not like to use the term intuition and spirituality as a noun, but let me put it as an adjective, that an intuitive experience and spiritual experience. So what I will be doing today is first I will try to make a case for experience as a form of methodological approach in philosophizing, and within that I would like to submit that intuitive experience must not be done away with in philosophical discourses. And further, I would like to argue that spiritual experience can also be a form of philosophical method. So that is how I wish to engage with all of you for today's lecture. Those of us who are deeply rooted in philosophical discourses are largely influenced by what you call looking at philosophy as a form of reasoning or analysis. So a very rational approach to understanding of the self and the world and reality is what philosophy looks at, and philosophy ought to be seen the whole discourse of reality with most rational approach, and our job should be to understand, to dissect and analyze the concepts which are content of philosophical discourse. As you know, that philosophy as a discipline does not deal with the empirical reality directly, but it deals with concepts, ideas and narratives linked to the empirical world. So we are not running away from the empirical world, but philosophy does not deal with the empirical world directly, but it deals with concepts and narratives on the empirical world. And also we try to transcend, we look for concepts that try to transcend the empirical world, the world of variables. The empirical world is supposed to be world of variables, and philosophers generally aim at the end of their discourse towards something which is invariant, something which is permanent, or even the word eternal. So in this process of engagement, largely philosophers have tried to rely on few methods which are very popularly being taught in all the departments of philosophy, including this country, and that those are perception, inference, testimony, comparison. So these are well-known what you call tools or methods of philosophizing, and this has been done both in the West as well as in Indian philosophical tradition. So even in Nyaya philosophy, which is largely epistemologically rooted and based on reasoning, the whole idea of pratyaksha, anuman are two major components of epistemological exercise. And then you have testimony and comparison also as other forms of what you call epistemological methods. Now, I would like to submit that philosophy is not all about reasoning. Philosophy is not all about conceptual analysis. If we do that, we are going to leave out a major part of what you called as philosophical subjects, philosophical topics. We know from the history of ideas or history of philosophy that it was in the early half of 20th century, in 1920s and 30s, and it carried on after that for some time. The impact of logical positivism, which tried to reduce philosophy as an exercise deeply entrenched in logical analysis. In other words, all that, the claim of the logical positivist, that all claims that we make about the world through our language, because we communicate, we express our understanding of the world through language, and every expression that we make through language must be translatable or reducible to the most atomic propositions of what you called subject copula, and also what you call statement of assertion or a statement of negation, is or is not. So every statement has to be reduced to S is P or S is not P. And if you cannot reduce the philosophical statements into this propositional statement, then you consider those topics and language and propositions as pseudo propositions. And this got momentum for quite some time, for almost few decades in the first half of 20th century. But we also know that this exercise could not, rather than dealing with philosophy, they excluded a large part of philosophical topics, philosophical subjects. So my submission here is that philosophy is a very old exercise, an old discipline, cannot afford to be so one-sided that we ignore a major chunk of what we consider as philosophical theme or topics from the purview of the study of philosophy. So I would like to submit that experience as a method of inquiry is extremely significant, and experience as a way of philosophizing must be taken into cognizance and taken much more seriously than we have done so far. If you look again little closely, the way I have just narrated sometimes back, that what are the methods of epistemological inquiry. So what we come across first is the sense perception. So the sensations that we get out of seeing, out of hearing, about dust, smell, that we all know, the five sense perception. So experience somehow is equated with this sense perceptual experience. When we say experience, we somehow tend to equate it with sense perception. This is one way. And of course the other methods remains anuman, what you call in Sanskrit, inference, as you say in English, and then testimony and comparison and so on. Now, what is interesting in Indian tradition is that it has recognized two kinds of experiences among many kind of division that we talk about pratyaksha, but one kind of classification that the ancient philosophers in India have done is of laukik and alaukik pratyaksha. So, an ordinary perception and extraordinary perception, and this is something that is to be noted. So, what you consider as experience which is not of the sense perception, but an experience beyond the realm of the five sense perceptual experience are also being recognized. So, this is one submission I would like to make. But those of us who are deeply influenced by Western European and what you call Northern American mode of philosophizing largely equate experience with sense perceptual experience. But we also know that within the European intellectual discourse, and I am not using the word philosophy because I would not even like to limit the intellectual discourse. I might even bring in the domain that literature deals, the domain that religion deals, which also could be also a domain that philosophy deals. So, there are a common platform where literature, theology, philosophy, history and science can deal. So, in the continental tradition, the whole discourse of philosophizing somehow recognizes this aspect of the experience which is not limited to the sense perception. Take the case of phenomenology, and we know very well that it was through Edmund Husserl that phenomenology as a transcendental method of philosophizing, which he considered to be more scientific than the positivist, recognized experience as a method of philosophical inquiry towards gathering what you call the essence of what philosophy is, essence of the world, what he called as eidos. So is the eidetic reduction as a method of inquiry. So the point here is, I am not going to go in details on Husserl, that is not my mandate here. I am submitting before you that experience as the continental philosophers thought of, and not only it is Husserl, but later on by Sartre, by what you call Merleau-Ponty or even Heidegger, the whole domain of understanding is driven by or gathered through what you call as experience as a method of philosophizing. And this word experience does not merely represent the sense perception, it is something more. So the word adumbration in Husserl, where you link what you perceptually experience in your immediate past with your present, and also anticipating something towards the future, is a form of experience which is not limited to the sense perceptual experience. So there is an act of intuition that plays a very significant role when we claim that we know the world. When you listen to the music, let me give this example. When you listen to a classical Indian music, for instance, let us presume that you are listening to Rag Bhageswari at the late night. and you listen to the vocal or even to the sitar or any other instruments, this raga is best suited for the late night music. And as you listen, this listening is through a sense perception of gathering the sound, hearing the sound. So empirically speaking, each temporal moment we listen to the sound of the music is a sound bite. So you can say sound bite 1 at temporal time T1, sound bite 2 at time T2 episode. So each time episode you have, you also listen to the sound bites. And let us presume that for temporal T10, the sound bite is SB10. Now, this is what you are empirically experiencing, its sound bite at its moment. But when you say, and when you listen to this music and say that, wow, what a beautiful music this is, and you say that, oh, what a raga Bhageswari is. Now, what you are gathering is not the sound bite alone. Sound bites are episodic sense perceptual experience. But when you say, what a beautiful music, and when you exclaim with the word, wow, that is where you capture the very essence of this music. Now, this capturing of this essence of music, where you claim that I know the meaning of what Bhageswari after all, after listening for 1 hour of this music by, say, none other than late Veena Sahasrabudhe, and you listen to this music and say what a music it is. Now, it is not about aggregation of the sound bites, but a unity that you have gathered, you have experienced, through which you say that what a music it is. So it is here the Husserlian philosophy of intuitively grasping the essence of that music, not limiting to the empirical sense perceptual experience. Yes, you are listening to it. There is a sense perception. There is an experience which is sense perceptual experience. But you are not limiting yourself to that sense perceptual experience. There is a transcendence that takes place when you unite, when you create a unity of the sound, and then you understand the beauty of this music. So what I called here as intuitive experience is precisely this, that intuition is not a bad word in the discourse of philosophy. Intuition is extremely significant. What was Descartes doing? Was he not intuitive? To think that the things that I am supposed to be listening, perhaps it is not. The things that I am seeing around, supposing I am dreaming. So this intuition of there is something very certain for which I have to investigate. This feeling itself comes from intuition. What was Descartes doing when he thought that there is something called God as a ultimate substance beyond the substance of mind and body, which we normally do not teach our students, because our Western masters, the scholars of philosophy, have written about Descartes as the most rational philosopher. So if you look at the history of modern philosophy, and you say rationalism, empiricism, and you say the first rationalist is none other than René Descartes. But what was the book he was writing? Meditation. What is the meaning of meditation? Is not meditation very close to an act of intuition? Where has the place of God gone in Descartes when we read Descartes in English language? because the book on Descartes that are made available to us projects certain aspects of Cartesian philosophy, that is, the act of skepticism, the act of doubt, what you call skeptic stance, and search for certitude, which is built on cogito. This is all that we learn. But what about recognizing by Descartes the ultimate substance being God? This has been underplayed by philosophers in the West, and we have followed what these philosophers, the commentators, have written on Descartes. My submission is precisely this, that intuition plays a significant role in Cartesian philosophy, and that is something I want to bring in. Even at the core of rationalist philosophy, there are certain aspects, what you call, driven by intuition. So intuition remains a significant method of inquiry in philosophical discourse. That is what I wish to make. Now, this question of anubhav, which is the Sanskrit term for what you call as experience. Now, this anubhav, or this experience which is intuitive, somehow has not been recognized enough, as I have told in the beginning, primarily because, this is my reading, is because it somehow falls short of, what you call a display of objectivity. Because the philosophical analysis, the conceptual analysis that those who engage in through language somehow are able to communicate through the medium of ordinary language what this whole conception all about. So when you conceptualize, you try to display it through the medium of ordinary language or an artificial language. In case of specific scientific discourses, you have to create an artificial language. The word, say, weight, mass, velocity, speed, these are artificial language. So you need artificial language also to communicate. So there is somewhere objectively displayable form of communication through this language, whether it is ordinary or artificial. Whereas somehow down the line, this anubhav, or the experience, seems to fall short of that displayability. Perhaps it cannot display in the way those who play with language and logic can do. Now, the nature of this experience, which I am calling intuitive experience, unlike the perceptual experience, and we know Husserl has been criticized by many because of this intuitive aspect, saying that he has gone towards the metaphysical domain, that this intuitive experience is perhaps the most immediate. It is the first person account of experience, and it is this first person account that plays both a positive and negative role in recognition or derecognition of this experience itself. We know, and this has been debated in the Western philosophical discourses in analytic philosophy, that what you call first person account is the most immediate. You don't have doubt, like Wittgenstein's articulation that I don't have to ask and doubt when I have a toothache. When I have a headache, I don't have to ask someone whether I have a headache. or I don't have to ask myself whether I am having a headache. That I am having headache is itself the most immediate experience I can have. So it is directly accessed by the first person. But what is directly accessed perhaps cannot be displayed to the second person or to the third person in the most objective ways. Only you can say through a language, but you cannot perhaps display it, what you have, the pain in your head, or a pain in your knees, or pain in your teeth. So at one level, the first person experience is the most immediate, authentic experience. Yet at the same time, it cannot be displayed with certain clarity and objectivity in the way we can display it, saying that I can see the camera in front of me, or I am giving a lecture at this point in time, and this can be verified objectively by people seeing at me. So this first person direct experience is something which is always a problematic area, and intuition, being another form of direct experience, become further problematic. Now let me bring it from the history of ideas, that this is not a new issue. This is an old issue, and this has been dealt by philosophers. It is only, the question only is whether we accept this method as acceptable to us, I mean whether we accept intuition as a method or not. Look at Soren Kierkegaard, the Danish philosopher, who critiqued this whole objective scientific methodology in philosophy and says that subjectivity is truth. So if there is something called truth that philosophers look out for, that truth is that which is directly accessed by me as a first person. And this access of the truth at the end is not through the empirically driven, what you call sense experiential perception, sense perceptual experience. It is not through sense perception alone that you gather this knowledge or understanding. So this direct access by the first person is the most authentic experience that we can think of. And this has been continuously pleaded by many of the what you call existential phenomenologists and many existentialists. Even I would put Kierkegaard into this, and also Nietzsche, much before the movement of existentialism came. But these two philosophers, Nietzsche and Kierkegaard, were the one who were trying to capture the essence of what you called as intuitive experience. So intuitive experience is extremely important, and let me end this first slot of my lecture with what Nietzsche have celebrated, what you called the emotion and passion. His division driven from what you call philology between Apollonian mode of philosophizing and Dionysian mode of philosophizing. Most of the philosophers look out for reason and reasoning, which is an Apollonian method of inquiry. Whereas I will not go into detail about it, but celebration of the emotive, the passion, the immediacy is what Nietzsche was trying to highlight, and that is what intuition has been brought to the center stage of philosophizing. And I would submit that intuitive experience is a very powerful method of inquiry in philosophical discourse.